A lot of people, when they think of alt season, they think of what happened like last cycle, where alts outperformed Bitcoin for a really long time. But in reality, a lot of times in cycles before last cycle, the alt season that people want, it really only lasts for like a month or two, right? It's not a year-long process. It's a very short process. Everyone FOMOs into altcoins. Bitcoin dominance capitulates, it drops, and then the bear market begins. I do think from this point, for the next at least 2 to 3 weeks, you should see Bitcoin dominance continue to climb. The thing I always do in midterm years, like regardless, like even if I think it's going to be a bear market, I still keep some Bitcoin, and I usually get out of all altcoin positions, right? Because Bitcoin, if it is a bear market next year, then Bitcoin should recover to new all-time highs first in the following cycle, right? And we saw that this cycle as well. Like Bitcoin hit all-time highs way before Ethereum did and most other altcoins. So I think you have to at least protect your downside by getting out of altcoins. Because if there is a bear market next year, it probably won't be as bad as the last bear market.
Benjamin Cowen begins by explaining why so many traders have been offsides with altcoins this year. He says most retail investors expected a repeat of 2021, an era of zero interest rates, unlimited liquidity, and money printing galore. But that environment is gone. This cycle, he argues, structurally resembles 2017, when Bitcoin dominance climbed relentlessly before a short-lived alt season near the top. Back then, alt-BTC pairs rallied in the summer, peaked around August or September, then collapsed into early November. They had a brief bounce, then another crash into December, and that was it.
Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space and drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks and enjoy the video.
I think the reasoning for, the reason why people are so offsides with altcoins is because they expected it to be like 2021, when we had rates at zero and money printing galore. And this is more like the 2017 cycle, like structurally, and also in the way that altcoins have been behaving with respect to Bitcoin. And so one of the things that I've mentioned a few times is how similar this is to the 2017 cycle, where you have this rally by alt Bitcoin pairs that starts in the summer, and then it kind of like tops out in August, September, and then it comes crashing back down by early November. And then it got another rally, and then another crash in early December. So the reasoning for kind of talking about the devaluation of alt Bitcoin pairs was just saying, hey guys, like what if this plays out like it's always played out in other cycles besides the 2021 cycle, where you continue to see altcoins drop against Bitcoin even as late as early November of the post-halving year. A lot of people, when they think of alt season, they think of what happened like last cycle, where alts outperformed Bitcoin for a really long time. But in reality, a lot of times in cycles before last cycle, the alt season that people want, it really only lasts for like a month or two, right? It's not a year-long process. It's a very short process. Everyone FOMOs into altcoins. Bitcoin dominance capitulates, it drops, and then the bear market begins, right? And during the bear market, Bitcoin dominance kind of just slowly works its way back up. Again, I think the reason this cycle people have been off sides is because they expected it to play out like last cycle. And right now, we're at a very precarious position where I'm of the opinion that the only way you can even get an alt season at this point is if Bitcoin goes to all-time highs, right? And as we've seen throughout this entire cycle, the process of Bitcoin going to all-time highs is accompanied by Bitcoin dominance also going to new cycle highs, right? And you can see that this purple line right here, let me put Bitcoin on this chart, but anytime this cycle that Bitcoin has rallied to a new cycle high, you'll notice that during that time, Bitcoin dominance is going up. And then when the new cycle high is breached, that's when Bitcoin dominance gets a correction, right? And that also happened over here as well. Like as Bitcoin rallied to a new cycle high, Bitcoin dominance went up, and then again in 2025, right? So you've seen that process play out many, many times. So from this point, in order to get an alt season by the end of the year, you have to have a rally by Bitcoin to all-time highs. And if you don't get that, if Bitcoin just struggles for the rest of the year, what's going to happen is you won't have an alt season, but Bitcoin dominance will go up regardless. As we saw on last Friday, we saw, altcoins capitulate. I think we're kind of in this defensive rotation right now, and that's likely going to persist for at least 2 to 3 more weeks, minimum, would be my guess. I can think of a scenario why altcoins would go up on their USD pairs, right? It would require Bitcoin to go up. But in that case, Bitcoin is still going up more, So I think that's kind of the rationale that I've had for a lot of this cycle of like, why even bother with all these altcoins unless you're going to take a short-term trade, right? Like if you're going to take a short-term trade and trade the breakout and then get out of the altcoin before the rotation back to Bitcoin begins, you can do that. But there's not really been a time in this cycle where an individual altcoin, except for maybe like 2 or 3, there's not really been a great time where an individual altcoin was a great long-term investment, right? It was always just a short-term trade back to Bitcoin after you get some profits from it. So I do think from this point, for the next at least 2 to 3 weeks, you should see Bitcoin dominance continue to climb. And the thing about it is it doesn't really matter what way Bitcoin goes, right? Every single outcome would likely yield alts fading for a little bit on at least their Bitcoin pairs. Bitcoin, we're at 200K in December, right? Like if Bitcoin doubles up between now and December, I think a lot of people that are currently calling for an extended cycle might actually change their mind, right? Like if the price
probably the time.
Right.
ETH will go crazy through January like it did last time, and then we're done. Yeah.
And so that's why I think we need to be open-minded. Like I think we should be open-minded to both outcomes. The reason why I lean towards the 4-year cycle isn't because that's what all Bitcoin's always done. It's also been what the S&P has historically done through many decades in its past as well. Like let me just show you a quick chart. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but I just want to show you what I'm talking about. Yeah, so if you look at like the S&P 500, a lot of people sort of chalk up the 4-year cycle for Bitcoin to the halving, but I don't even think that's the reason. I mean, if you look at the S&P in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, you'll see that we had 4-year cycles back then as well, right? You have a low in 1958, 1962, 1964, or sorry, not 1966, right? So you have 58, 62, 66, 1970, 1974, 1978, 1982, right? So the 4-year cycle has existed before. And you could argue that it's based maybe around the presidential cycle, for instance.
I've made that argument.
So I don't even think the halving is the culprit for the 4-year cycle. I just think it has more so to do with other things, right? Like other things in the market. Maybe it's liquidity, maybe it's just the election cycle. I don't know. But that's why I sort of geared towards that. But what you'll notice with the S&P is eventually the 4-year cycle did break, right? Because after 1982, you would have expected the next low to be 1986, right? But it wasn't. I mean, we had in 1986, the market, didn't really move a whole lot, but then the next low ended up being 1987 instead. So my thought process on this is that the 4-year cycle will eventually break, right? It's just a matter of which cycle does it happen. Is it this cycle, or is it the next cycle, or is it the cycle after that? I don't know when it's going to happen. It will absolutely break. The hard part for me right now with it is that, like, so far, everything keeps, like, kind of playing out. Like, you had the way the cycle ends for Bitcoin, every single time, the way it's always ended, is you have a high in August or early September, and then a low in September or early October. So let's just go through each cycle, right? So in 2013, you had a high in August, and then a low the week of September 30th, so going into early October. And then you had the rally into the market cycle top. That was the first cycle. The second cycle, same thing. A high in August, a low in September, a rally into the top. And the last cycle, same thing, right? A high in early September, a low in, like late September, early October, and then a rally into the market cycle top. This time, we had a high in August, a low in September, and then arguably a rally into the market cycle top. The only thing is that hasn't happened just yet. So either this time is different and we don't get the rally into the market cycle top, or it's still ahead of us. So I think what I'm thinking about it right now is that, like, when we think about cycle theory, none of the peak indicators have gone off, right? Like no indicator that anyone has created since 2019 has actually signaled that the top is in, right? So that rally is either ahead of us or it's not going to happen at all. If it's not going to happen at all, that'll likely be obvious to me by the end of the year. If Bitcoin is still not trading to new all-time highs by mid-December, it would be hard for me to like stay bullish on it past that point. Like I would have to start assuming that next year would be a bear market, because with markets, I tend to think that tops are processes and that bottoms are events, right? Like bottoms happen really quickly, tops happen over a really long period of time. And the uncomfortable truth right now that I'm grappling with, and I still have my Bitcoin position, I'm still holding on in the hopes that we can get another rally, but the one crazy thing is that like it's only $2,000 higher than it was on Inauguration Day, you know? Like on Inauguration Day, Bitcoin had 109K, and right now it's at 111K. I'm like, what the hell's been going on, you know, for the last 9 months to allow for this? So for me, I want to give it one final chance to get a rally, right, into December, potentially, or, you know, through this month, and potentially as late as December. Like, I want to give it that chance, you know, to maybe connect the dots on this or something. But I also, if it hasn't done it by the end of the year, I have a feeling like a lot of people are going to start pivoting, right? Because they're looking at it the same way I am. They're like, well, it hasn't really moved in a while. If it moves a lot by the end of the year and it's at 200K, yeah, I feel like you have to go into 2026 assuming it's a bear market, right? If it doesn't move for the rest of the year, then I would wonder like why not? Like what's going on? Like what's keeping Bitcoin from doing what it's always done? The only way that I might be inclined to think that it could go on longer is if you just kind of have another steady incline. Everyone gets wrecked at some point, and the market humbles literally everyone. There's not a single person that doesn't get humbled at some point. I think the way I would navigate it, though, is at the very least, I think you have to... The thing I always do in midterm years, like regardless, like even if I think it's going to be a bear market, I still keep some Bitcoin, and I usually get out of all altcoin positions, right? Because Bitcoin, if it is a bear market next year, then Bitcoin should recover to new all-time highs first in the following cycle, right? And we saw that this cycle as well. Like Bitcoin hit all-time highs way before Ethereum did and most other altcoins. So I think you have to at least protect your downside by getting out of altcoins. Because if there is a bear market next year, it probably won't be as bad as the last bear market, right? Because the last bear market was a little bit more bearable than the one before that. If you look at it, every bear market gets a little bit easier to manage. The first one was like 94% down. The next one was 87. The next one was 84. The next one was 77. So I'm saying if there is a bear market next year, from the high in Q4 to the low in, say, late 2026, I would say probably about a 70% drawdown. But that doesn't mean it has to be a 70% drawdown from 126. Like, it could be, but it also could be a 70% drawdown, you know, from a higher price if we can get one final push before the end of the year. So again, like a lot of these numbers don't always make sense. Imagine in 2017, imagine it's October 2017, right? It's the exact same week, right? The week of October 16th or whatever. Bitcoin was sitting at $5,000. Now imagine I came on your channel and said Bitcoin's going to drop 80% next year. That would have sounded crazy, especially because Bitcoin then rallied 300%. It still dropped 80%, but it only dropped 40% from where the price was in October, right? So again, I think this is one of those things where a lot of people disagree, but maybe by December, more people will be on the same page if the bullish view actually plays out.
Cowen then highlights Ethereum, where his outlook has evolved. For months, he was bearish on ETH BTC until April, when Ethereum finally hit its lower regression band. Historically, every major ETH BTC bottom has formed right there. That was the signal he'd been waiting for. He flipped bullish on Ethereum, arguing that it had gone home to fair value. From there, ETH became a reasonable addition to a Bitcoin-heavy portfolio. Using modern portfolio theory, Cowen shows that an 80-20 split, 80% Bitcoin, 20% Ethereum, offers the optimal balance between risk and return.
You know, for the longest time, I was bearish on ETH against Bitcoin, but I completely flipped that view in April. And the reason I did was because, you know, Ethereum did what it needed to do, right? Like it went home, as I say, right? Like it went to its lower logarithmic regression band. And so a lot of people just thought I was just like perma-bear on Ethereum. But in reality, what I was trying to communicate with people was that in order for ETH to bottom against Bitcoin, Ethereum has to go to its regression band, right? And you can see throughout all of history, every time Ethereum goes to its regression band, that's where the Ethereum valuation bottoms against Bitcoin, right? And so in April, I actually bought Ethereum, right? I thought, all right, now it's a good buy, because before it wasn't a good buy, because while it was going up, it was bleeding to Bitcoin, right? So you're just better off buying Bitcoin. But in April, everything changed, right? I thought ETH had bottomed against Bitcoin, therefore it became worth the risk. Now, to what extent, if you go to like modern portfolio theory and look at, say, what portfolio composition maximizes your Sharpe ratio or Sortino ratio for a portfolio consisting of Bitcoin and Ethereum, the Sortino ratio is maximized with 83% Bitcoin and 17% Ethereum. The Sharpe ratio is maximized with 81% Bitcoin and 19% ETH. So you're essentially saying that like an 80-20 split kind of gives you exposure to that move by Bitcoin, but it also allows you to, you know, have something else in case we get a rotation into these higher risk assets before the end of the year, like Ethereum. So Ethereum was an asset that a lot of people, you know, thought I was never going to change my mind on. But like once it fulfilled what I felt like it needed to, I then pivoted. So yes, absolutely. You could have, it is possible to have an alt season, right? It absolutely is. But in order for it to happen, you have to have what happened in 2017 play out, which is essentially you have this like big Bitcoin rally that goes to all-time highs really quickly. Everyone FOMOs into Bitcoin, right? Everyone feels like they're missing out on the rally, right? Like everyone FOMOs in. They trade their altcoins and Bitcoin just goes higher. And what just happened, by the way, in 2017 is kind of what you could is what's sort of happening now, where Ethereum had a nice rally kind of up into August, but then it just kind of stays flat for a few months. That's why Bitcoin dominance went so much higher back in 2017. Is Bitcoin went parabolic in October and early November, and even going into December, and a lot of altcoins didn't really start moving until about mid-November, right? So Bitcoin just kept going up. And everyone's sitting around like, well, what the hell am I doing with all these altcoins? They're staying flat. And then once they all finally capitulated and gave up on alt season, that's when alt season actually happened, right? Is once everyone gave up. Right, yeah. And so you're kind of, when you look at alt Bitcoin pairs, you know, this capitulation we had, a lot of people blame it on the tariffs by Trump. But the point is there's always a narrative to support it. No one remembers the narrative in October of 2017 as to why alt Bitcoin pairs had that same capitulation, right? No one remembers that, but it still happened, right? It still happened. We had very similar capitulations, and ultimately they did not bottom out until early November, and then a slightly higher low in early December. So all I'm here to say is with Ethereum, I pivoted back in April. The reason I didn't pivot with alts is because I didn't think there had been enough pain. And what you'll notice is that alt Bitcoin pairs put in a lower low, while ETH Bitcoin is likely going to put in a higher low, right? And the reason why Ethereum, right, a much higher low. The reason why Ethereum is able to do that is because it got sufficiently wrecked back in April, right? It was bleeding. Like, look at this massive bleed out on its Bitcoin pair. It was an outright capitulation. You did not see that same thing in altcoins back then, right? Like for altcoins, total 3, it was a very mild bleed, right? It was never, I don't think we ever truly reached the point where people thought that their altcoins were dead. We absolutely reached the point where people thought Ethereum was dead, you know? Back when it was trading at $1,300, $1,400, and you had Bitcoin at like 75K. You had Bitcoin at a higher price than the prior cycle's peak, and Ethereum was still at $1,300.
It was like
right?
60% off. Yeah.
Right. So you had a lot of people that thought Ethereum was dead. I think a lot of people want to pretend like they think alt season's not going to happen so that it actually does. But there's still a lot of people holding on. And I think one way that you could get an alt season, like the optimistic view, one way you get it is if Bitcoin starts to go up, and it really starts to go up, it leaves people behind. They FOMO back in because look, on this capitulation here, we've already paved the way for altcoins. Like we already know they can go down again to new lows. We just saw it happen really quickly. Bitcoin's already showed you what it could do if liquidity flows back to it. And if it goes back up, people will FOMO in, they'll trade their altcoins, they'll FOMO in, it'll end up marking the low for alt Bitcoin pairs, the high for Bitcoin dominance, and then you could get an alt season. But again, Scott, as we said earlier, the only way you get that is for Bitcoin to get the parabolic rally first.
Cowen doesn't dismiss the idea of another alt season, he just defines it realistically. He says a true alt season can only happen after a parabolic Bitcoin rally. In 2017, Bitcoin went vertical through October and November, while most altcoins stayed flat. Only after everyone capitulated, after traders gave up on their alts and chased Bitcoin, did the rotation finally begin. That's the paradox. Alt season begins only after everyone stops believing in it. So, to get that outcome this time, Bitcoin must go on a fast vertical breakout toward new highs. That FOMO will pull liquidity from altcoins into Bitcoin.